Hello, hello. Sandra, that was a fast join, boy. Hello, Michael. Going good. How are you?
Good. Just buzzing along here. We have,
Sounds
how
good.
about yourself? How are you?
I'm good. Putting together the last few things with regard to DeSci Peaks.
Oh, that looks cool.
Which,
I've been following that on
yeah,
Twitter.
yes, it's gonna be fun. As a matter of fact, Mike, I don't know if you're free on Saturday, but we're gonna be doing a test run, just to kind of, see how it goes with people requesting to come on, like come up as speakers and all this kind of stuff. So if you're free, would love to have you in the test group.
Yes, I will. I will. I can do it.
All right, cool. So it'll be there like Saturday, 10:30 a.m. I'll message you
That
kind of
Eastern or
when we go.
okay, will do.
Yeah, yeah, our time. Cool. So usually how this works is I open it up earlier, you sound great. And then just maybe, kickstart it around 12:05, depending how many people flow in, but just give enough time for people to kind of
Yeah, this Twitter. I was a big fan of Clubhouse when it was a thing, and I met some really cool people on it actually. One of whom I recently met up with, and we just met on Clubhouse and had just been sort of staying in contact. And then they were in New York, and we just hung out. It was really fun. So maybe it'll be that
yeah.
same sort of vibe with Twitter Spaces.
Hopefully that's the idea, right? To kind of get people beyond just understanding what the project is, but to get to know people as who they are. So I hope it does curry this kind of relationships that turn into like, hey, we can hang out, kind of like us. Can't wait to come down to New York or you to come up to where I'm at, so we can like hang out and
For
talk.
sure. I would love that, and it's interesting also. Like Twitter Spaces are a bit more planned. I think that was one of the interesting things about like Clubhouse was it's just like very. Were you on Clubhouse or?
Very little, very little.
One of the interesting things was you could just sort of like impromptu like roam around and find things to do because there was enough like information density that you could, just see what's happening.
Yeah, for sure. Sorry, excuse me. Yeah, for sure. I don't know what caused the demise of Clubhouse, but I know it was a very popular thing. I hope at some point something replaces it to kind of allow for that jump into like have that density of population
Yeah.
in like slightly unstructured way.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Big fan.
Yeah, I'm well. So that's the other thing, right? So that's the one side is great. The other side is it gives rise to a ton of insanity.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think they need something like maybe like like a light token curated chat or something where it's like if you pass some very low bar, then it's like open and free to roam around or something.
Yeah, if nothing else, than like some kind of like
Yeah,
tiered system of sort. Um,
I think just to make it so that everyone there is there for like the right reasons.
Exactly. So I mean, we're hoping that for DeSci Peaks, it's really going to be like a fireside. Like it looks very professional how we put it together, but it's going to be very much a fireside like discussion on the DeSci space, and we want it to be a little bit messy, a little bit crazy. I wanted people to vent their concerns and get things off their chest with other participants if possible, obviously in a respectful manner. But we want to kind of break down as many barriers to communication and talk about things that are really not talked about in the B-side space. So maybe a little bit edgy here and there, but that's kind of the goal.
Yes, I like that. I like that a lot. Um, Very cool. What are you excited about in sort of DeSci for next year?
Ooh, I'm honestly looking forward. Like the most exciting thing to me, I think, for DeSci is when things start to pick up as it relates to the market. I'm kind of wonder what that's going to bring to the DeSci space. In terms of like, scams, are we all just going to explode in terms of growth and all this kind of stuff and more adoption and eyes? I think the thing that I'm most interested in is I think by next year, projects are going to be a lot more mature. So we're going to start seeing a lot more, like usability of their products, community engagements. We should have a lot more events, and things like that. So I think that's what I'm most interested in from the scope of the entire space. There's not a single project that I've run into, except for maybe one, but I'm not going to touch on that one too much. But that isn't building something really interesting, and so I'm kind of keeping an eye, and I'm very happy and consider myself blessed to be in a position in this space to kind of keep an eye and be in connection with like all these different groups. So I'm looking forward to see what everybody kind of brings forth
Yeah.
in the next coming years.
More usability stuff, and yeah, I think that's
Yeah,
interesting.
I want to see products in their like closer to maturity states,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. I think we're getting there. I think also one thing that's going to push that a little bit is more focus on like the web 2.8, 2.7 sort of thing, where it's not
Yeah,
like 1,000% to web 3. And I think that can come at some high costs. And also things with like sign in with Ethereum are really cool products because they will basically allow you to like more or less attest to the data ownership thing, but
yeah.
not having to go through too much hassle of like using the wallets, or not using the wallets, but just like getting the money for gas and stuff. But I think that's like that's a bit of an issue for some people.
No, absolutely. There's like the abstraction of way of certain aspects, making it easier to come in and to onboard and to participate are definitely something that I'm looking forward uh, to see into the coming future. That's just going to help bring more people in, right?
Yeah, exactly, exactly. Um, yeah, building more community out. Yeah, getting people out and about, meeting each other. I think it just takes
Exactly.
DeSci is still new, so like when we talk about it with people, they still don't know. Sometimes,
No, I mean I've been like talking to people, key opinion leaders in DeFi, um, who kind of have like a scope of the land of the DeFi space and Web3, and they don't even acknowledge like DeSci. It's not on their radar. And every time I bring it up, they're like, oh, like that's cool, like something with actual use case. And so I think in the next year or so, there are going to be a lot more eyes, and I'm actively like petitioning these individuals to turn their eyes towards
yeah.
us to see that we're actually doing stuff. And funnily enough, I don't think he's here in this chat, but I had a conversation with somebody who started a DeSci project 4 or 5 years ago, and he was completely jaded at the prospect of the space, right? He found, I guess at that time DeSci was much like DeFi, like people were co-opting decentralized science as a name to like pump scams for essentially DeFi scams,
Oh yeah, yeah.
and that completely turned him off, and he's never looked back since. And so having this meeting with him just a half an hour ago, like, hey, no, like things have come a long way. Most DeSci is now a place of substance. We're doing things. You should come back and check it. I think things like that are really cool.
Yeah, 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 totally. Um, yeah. There's like all this sort of stuff going on now with like all this like data checking and stuff like that, which is interesting.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Okay, so we've talked, you and I, a bit. We can do the introduction. I think we have some of our diehards here. Ed, it's always good to see you. Carol, thanks for coming. I'm sure other people will filter on in as the time proceeds. So we'll start with our usual welcome intro. Hello, everybody. My name is Jelani, if you don't know by now. And welcome to the 16th episode of the DeSci Rising series, put on by DeSci World, where our goal here, excuse me, is always to provide an opportunity for many of the wonderful projects on our growing DeSci World dashboard to just formally introduce themselves, update their progress, highlight their achievements, and just generally engage with both the DeSci world and the wider DeSci community. Now, the idea behind all of this is that at DeSci World, we very much believe that more than the tech, more than the funding, it is the community using these tools that will usher in many of the changes that we are all looking for DeSci to bring to the various legacy STEM industry. Now, in today's episode, I have the very great pleasure of speaking to somebody that I consider a friend, Michael Fisher, the founder of DBDAO, which is a protocol that builds community-owned databases that essentially makes each database a DAO and each row within that database an NFT, giving rise to very interesting incentive mechanisms that I'm sure we will be exploring throughout our talk. And so with that, welcome, Michael, and thank you for taking the time today to help us learn not only about yourself, but some of the great work that is being done DBDAO.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks for inviting me. Yeah, I've been working with Jelani for maybe a month or more now, and yeah, we just had a. I'm really excited about what DeSci World is doing, and giving a good ontology of the space, and that really excited me a lot. And thanks for all the people joining us, and uh, Caro, Ed, and Xander, and everyone else. And yeah, so I'm excited to be here.
Cool. Yes, we have been working together a little bit. There's going to be some announcements coming, hopefully soon, of collaborative efforts amongst DAOs. But we're here to showcase yourself and DBDAO. So how I kind of like to start this off is basically, introductions. Can you introduce yourself, kind of give us an idea how you came into the space and, how you kind of got your way here?
Totally. I just around a little bit ago, I finished my PhD at Stanford. So I was in California and I was studying computer science and natural language processing and sort of AI. And the goal, the project was to figure out how to convert between natural language and code. So it's like we had this idea of like an Alexa that you would just like tell it what you wanted it to you tell it what you wanted it to do, and then it would figure it out and convert what you said into code. So if this wasn't a thing that was that an Alexa had a skill in, it would be able to auto generate that program dynamically and then run it. And before that, I was an undergrad at Stanford, also studying computer science. And then, sort of after I finished the PhD, this was during COVID, and I wrote a book on regulating AI based on a class I had TA'd from that was taught at Stanford Law School by a California Supreme Court justice. And what excited me about that book was sort of how to think about like the intersection of like cutting edge technologies like AI, or AI in this particular case for this book, and how it intersected with sort of more social systems like the legal system and how to resolve some of these types of contradictions. And so I moved out to New York, and then I started the company, and it was originally called Curate DAO. And the idea was to sort of like the process of finding good data and curating it was an important thing that I thought like crypto had a good chance at solving, because it's sort of crypto lowers the coordination costs for people having to work together, and assembling large data sets is oftentimes can be tricky. And the person that assembles that data set isn't like paid. So the idea is that people who assemble these data sets should get partial ownership, or whatever we want to call it, of the whole data set that is created there. And we eventually changed the name to DBDAO just to reflect more on sort of an emphasis on databases instead of like curation, but there's still the sort of the same it's the same product. And so then we were sort of using that concept of curation and large data sets and structured data and crypto, obviously. And we were looking for sort of spaces that it was particularly well suited for. And me coming from a science and engineering background, and having done user studies and stuff like that. And I learned about sort of DeSci at this Funding the Commons in New York that was during, I think, NFT NYC week. And this concept that we had created with this large scale curation, structured data, seemed like it would be like a very good fit for the types of like decentralized science projects that a lot of people are doing, and where they need to ensure high quality of data, having provenance on all the data, being Web3 native, being easy to use, incentivizing people to contribute data, whether that be through money or through other things like impact certificates or NFTs, or a variety of things. And so it's just sort of all sort of fit together. And then since then, we've just sort of I've been learning more about it and helping to contribute to sort of like what is DeSci and how it all fits together.
That's a very nice, very interesting story. So from, academic to author to architect of DeSci project to potentially something that can integrate itself as a base layer to help support the DeSci space. It's quite a trajectory in a very short period of time, Mikey.
Yeah, we've moved it around. I mean, we listen to like what people are. We show people our product and listen to what people say about it, and sort of and have moved and have like adapted a lot of things about it to try and make it fit for within the DeSci space and what people are finding really useful.
For sure, right? Iteration to improve market fit. Um, and so, okay, so DBDAO, I mean, I want to go into some of the tech and some of the meticulousness of it, but as an overview, DBDAO, is it actually a DAO? Does it support, is it kind of a DAO infrastructure or is it leaning towards that? Can you talk about it more of like the executive or organizational structure first?
Yeah. So I think a DAO, I mean, a DAO is, oh, meant could be many different things. I think one way to define sort of a DAO is like a community, and a community or a DAO is very similar to just like a bunch of people who are interested in the same thing, or sort of another positive way of describing it is some group or community that is like non-zero sum. So that everyone in the community or that participates in it gets more than what they put in. And you get that from the ability to work together with other people or learn about other things. And so I think of the database as being like one of many tools that would be really helpful for certain types of DAOs to have. So the DAO is managed, the database is DBDAO is managed by a DAO. So they're the ones who, the DAO is the one that set the direction of the database. So what is going to be inside this database? Is it going to be a database around longevity? And then is it going to be a database around collecting different plant samples throughout the world? And sort of what's the purpose of this data set? And then the DAO also sets out the schema. This is a bit more of a low level. So they sort of define the protocol. So is it going to be a picture? Is it going to be a name? Is it going to be a date and time? Everything like that. And those are important. And then so I think the last thing that the DAO does is they decide the quality bar. So because of the people are incentivized, which we'll talk more about later, the people basically earn money the more data, the more useful data that they contribute. So this could attract bad actors who are trying to spam the database. And a really powerful thing, as we've seen with things like Twitter recently or Instagram or Facebook, is deciding what types of content and who gets to participate in your platform based on the terms of service or the quality bar or other things you outline for what is allowed or not allowed on your platform. So the DAO is also in charge of determining which types of contents should be removed from the database because they don't reach a certain level. And how that works at the governance level of the DAO is up to the DAO. So we give each DAO a lot of autonomy in figuring out what is the right mechanism design. And what I mean by that is like, who are the people that get to decide? Is it one person who gets to decide to remove content? Is it a group of people? Is it 3 of 5? Is it one person is the executive, and then they deputize roles to other people who they trust, but then they can overrule? But we give a lot of autonomy to DAOs and organizations to determine how they want to like do those things I mentioned before, which is basically set the direction and define the schema and allow who's in or out of the database. And then the last thing the DAO does is they promote the database. So they get people involved and they tell people to contribute data and find people to who are interested in the project.
That's really cool. So, I mean, essentially, and I think I want to take one step away. So we talk about, the introduction talked about each database being a DAO in and of itself. So essentially, DB itself is like a layered, has a layered aspect to it. So itself is a DAO, so the macro umbrella, but then each database stand alone is a DAO, thus has different compartments within it to help organize its direction, it's like you said, marketing and all this kind of stuff. Is that a good
Yeah,
interpretation?
exactly. It's a data DAO, so it's a bunch of people coming together to, yeah, in different ways, and then also like it supports existing DAO. So there might be a DAO that has 100 people, but only maybe, 50 people are part of the database DAO because the other people are more interested in analyzing the data or other aspects of, say, like I don't know, friends with benefits wanted to have there's many other aspects of that DAO, and maybe only a portion of them are part of the data DAO.
Okay. And so to kind of go a little bit more into the governance structure, how is this broken down? So, traditionally DAOs have working groups, they have filtering layers that kind of not validate, but filter out certain processes. How does that break down? You mentioned something like curators and other aspects. How does that work for a DBDAO or for a given database in DBDAO?
Yeah, so there's a couple different roles within a DBDAO database, and the first is the person that views the content. So they're the ones who are looking at the content. Then there are the scouts, and the scouts are the people that contribute data to a database. So once someone has, figured out, that some piece of data matches the database, they go out and find it and are rewarded for their contribution. And then there is the curators of the database. So those are the people that that mint the database and that allow people in or out, that allow data in or out of the database. And yeah, so the main things are the curators, the scouts, and the viewers. And each of these different roles is rewarded. So when the database is minted, the different rewards for each of these contributors is set within the smart contract so that people that contribute know that they're getting certain rewards based on and they trust this, they trust the what is said in the smart contract.
Okay, that's cool. And so, you mentioned it a little bit before, but essentially anybody can come. So a scout can come and put in or propose to put in any kind of data. Um, Inclusive to these different roles that you mentioned, what is it that limits, you know, not malicious, but like disordinate, the data that shouldn't necessarily be a part of this DAO based off of its direction? What kind of limits the type of data that can go in and come out, or how is that limited?
Yes. So, okay. So let's say we set up a database for like everyone should submit a picture of different funguses that they find in the forest all around the world. And that database, and let's say this database is very valuable for a pharmaceutical company to know potential drugs that they should explore and areas of the world that they want. So they're willing to pay a lot of money for this data set. And the way DBDAO works is once, maybe a couple people contribute to the database and it gets some interest from this pharmaceutical company. And the pharmaceutical company then buys, the database now, or buys the current snapshot of the database. So each of the people who are in the database gets a percentage of that reward. Now, this will enable, like, if people know this, which they do, some bad actor could say, okay, I'm going to just contribute a lot of spam data, pictures of trees and pictures of just random plants. And so that when this database is bought, I'm going to own 99% of it. And now the database is worthless. So we developed this mechanism to try and disincentivizing spam content like that. And so when a scout contributes a piece of data to the database, there's a deposit that they have to make. So let's say it's like 10 cents. So I submit a picture of a mushroom. I attach a small amount of USDC to it. I submit it to the database. and then it's like reviewed by the curators of the database. And if the data looks good, then the data is added to the database and I get my 10 cents back. But if the data is bad, my 10 cents gets slashed and gets deposited into the database as part of what we call the reward pool, which is the same pool that is generated when people buy data from the database. And I lose my 10 cents. So if I know this, the 10 cents is not supposed to be a lot of money, but it is supposed to disincentivize someone from putting in a lot. If you put in, 1,000 things, then that costs $100, and you're probably not going to do that because you know that you're just going to end up losing money. So it sort of disincentivizes people from putting in bad content.
That's actually that's a very interesting way to do it, right? It's very simplistic in the sense like it's obvious, but something that I've never actually did not think about when considering how DBDAO was putting up a thing. It's very interesting. And so I guess is there a way to control or to scale up that let's say initial investment cost or that filtering mechanism? Because I imagine that if you have, like scanning plants and all that kind of stuff, it's a bit easier. But if you're doing data that is of much more significance, maybe a little bit more impactful or of more grandiose stage, can you ramp up that investment cost to kind of make it, you know, the same? Is there a need to do that? Have you guys thought about that?
Yeah, you can change the deposit amount based on current, I will say, like market and data dynamics. So that cost should basically cover the cost of detecting spam and so like it basically what it should do is it shouldn't deter people from putting in good content, but it should deter people from it should be high enough to deter someone from posting a lot of spam content. And the idea was basically borrowed from this idea of like it's called hash cache or other types of similar systems, but it's basically like a penny per email. Like if you had to pay a penny per email, then you wouldn't send out like a million advertisements about, I don't know, whatever someone spams uh, your email account about. And so that wouldn't make that economically beneficial anymore because you'd send out a million things and you'd have to pay, $1 per email or something, or a penny per email. You'd have to spend $1 million.
Yeah.
And yeah, so this is kind of the idea behind it. And there's a similar one with like where you had to compute like a small puzzle, like a cryptographic puzzle, so that
Yeah.
when I send you an email, I have to I personally on my computer have to like use some of my computer resources to so that your client will open it. And the idea is like if I have to do this, if I have to use compute, it takes like a minute to send it to you to do that compute work to send it to you. But if I had to send it out to a million people, it would take a million minutes. And so then that's like sort of it's like proof of work for email. And so this is sort of
Exactly.
using that same sort of idea of where like it's good to create a little bit of friction in the system. And this is like friction in the sense of staking as opposed to computational proof of work.
Yeah. No, I agree. I mean, if it works for a variety of different consensus mechanisms, it might as well work for this as well. Completely agree. And so we've jumped into the incentivization structure, and we may like summarize this a little bit later. But one thing that I'm curious about, because you do have these different roles, and assumedly the role for somebody, the investment, the time investment for somebody uploading data, and for the individual or the group of individuals to have to curate and validate and make sure that that data is correct, that's different investments in time. And so, as it relates to the incentivization, do these different roles get different portions of the pool once, let's say, an entity buys it? Like, how does the distribution work amongst the different roles? Or is
Yeah.
there?
Yeah. So basically, like this data set that people contribute to has value. And like one of the interesting things is this like one piece of data alone isn't super valuable. But if you have like 1,000 people, 1,000 pieces of data that are all of similar and high quality, you have a non-zero sum data set where it's probably worth more than sort of the sum of its parts, because no one's willing to, no company is probably going to buy or just one thing. But if someone has put in the work to curate and assemble this data set, it has a lot more value. So we have sort of, how does it look from a one person perspective? Because one person could sort of go around selling their one piece of data, but when you put a lot of it together, you get something that's non-zero sum. So what do we do with that extra value that's created? And we split it up and divide it to the people that contributed to the data set. So we, as the network for the protocol, we take a percent, which is around 10%. And then the curator takes around 30%. And because they put in a lot of work to curate the data set. And then lastly, we have the people that contributed the data, and they get 60%. And so there's a pool of 60% of the data, 60% of the revenue that's created, and say there is 60 rows in the database, and the database sells for $100. So that means there's $60 that are split between the 60 people that contributed, so each of them get a dollar. And so this is like a way of incentivizing people to do the work of curating data and doing the work of finding and contributing data. And so, yeah, so like we split up the rewards. So the money that is brought in, whether it be through, and there's many different ways to also fund a database. You can fund a database through someone just straight up buying it with USDC. You can fund a database with advertisements. So let's say every time someone views the database, they there's an ad that's next to it, and a penny of USDC is deposited into the smart contract, and then every day the money that's generated from that ad is dispersed to the people that contributed. Then there's other ways of doing it where you make part of the database hidden. So you show most of it, but then you encrypt certain columns. And people will basically pay for the keys to decrypt that column, and maybe on a monthly or yearly basis. And so this is like a subscription model where it's like very similar to like Spotify. Say you pay a monthly fee to Spotify, that money goes into the Spotify bank account, and then they look at how many minutes each person listened to each song, and then based on that, they give money out to the artists based on their sort of pro rata users' pro rata usage of their IP. And so the point being is like there's multiple ways, whether it be through someone directly buying it, data through subscriptions, through advertisements, to fund these databases. And then another really important one isn't through money at all. So for a lot of these projects, like we were talking to a mushroom project, and they're saying that like they don't want their community is based on trust and things that aren't really money. And if they were to introduce money into the ecosystem, it sort of change the dynamics. But they do want to have sort of like certificates, and so we can also have the website or the mushroom group issue an important thing, and then its impact certificate, and then divide that up to the people that contribute to the database. And this is a non-monetary way of incentivizing people also for different type. I mean, there's many different types of data and many different types of communities, so it's just a matter of finding like the one that fits.
Yeah, this is fantastic because I think that like one of the things that I mean, decentralization of data, that's one of the mission statements of data of DeSci, right? How do we bring this data collected together as kind of an open source metric? But I think people have had a difficult time, at least myself, I've had a difficult time conceptualizing how to incentivize the contribution. Like, how is it that we can reward participants for providing their data? Because, as my understanding, and please correct me if I'm wrong, whoever else is out there, um, doing things like utilization of IPFS and other data storage networks or other data storage solutions does not inherently incentivize or reward participants. And I like to see that this is as a well thought out mechanism to kind of facilitate that. And I like that you highlight the fact that rewards don't necessarily have to come from a financial standpoint. It can be anything that is layered into the framework of the database, I guess, when it's minted as kind of a of an NFT of sort. Um,
Yeah, so I mean, anything is a smart. Everything is tokenized. So you just plug in your token address, whether that be USDC, ETH, AVAX, any sort of token or an impact certificate or an NFT, and then we split it up and divvy it out, quote unquote, fairly, depending on some fair metric that is defined by the database.
that is another very important point that I wanted to ask about. So, oftentimes we'll see that organizations, entities, DAOs will launch their own token and maybe use that as an incentivization thing, but as an incentivization tool. But essentially, unless there is something backing that is quote unquote in DeFi parlance a shitcoin, you guys are not doing the same thing. You will take in a certain level, a certain currency, and use that to redistribute it out. So people can be paid in USDC or AVAX or whatever, just like you just mentioned, right?
Mm-hmm. Or it could be a shitcoin also. I mean, it depends on what people want to be paid in, what the database is
Exactly.
defined. But
Exactly.
what's interesting about having it be one of these like third tier coins, though, is a lot of times that those communities have issues of how to fairly distribute their that coin. And what's good about this system is that it has like it's what they would call it like proof of useful work, where someone isn't just if we've all been in discords and people want to do sort of like meaningless tasks, like make do certain like jump through different hoops in order to get on the whitelist or to get like an airdrop or whatever, and those tasks in theory should contribute to the greater community, but oftentimes they just seem like people are just like grinding in a video game. But what's interesting about DBDAO or like having people fill out information is people are contributing useful work into the system. So maybe you get on the whitelist or you get a token drop if you contributed some information around like a survey or things you would like to see or other things, and then it's checked to make sure that like you did a good job. And then people that did this useful work and contributed quote unquote useful data um, are then rewarded. And so this it's basically I'm trying to like push this concept of like proof of useful work as being like a thing. And one element of proof of useful work is like contributing useful data.
No, yeah, and I mean that's exactly it, right? I think I can envision that. I hadn't even thought about that until you just brought this up. But DBDAO's infrastructure as kind of integrating with the contribution mechanics of individual DAOs. So beyond just the data, querying and database format for actual like scientific data, but DAOs utilizing this whole metric of a DB database whereby contributors, all the data or all the proof, the useful work that contributors go into that, and then the DAO are on the other side of that equation, giving, from their treasury allocating a certain amount of funds, which then get redistributed based off of the performance and contribution of participants in the DAO, kind of providing a better structure to the DAO framework. It's really interesting. Very,
Yeah.
very interesting.
And we also have been, I mean, building off that idea is like we just built out this new thing where it's basically like it looks similar to like Google Forms or something where you just like drag and you define your schema or you define like what type of information you want to collect with a simple it's like a text box or an integer or an email address or a question, and that interface is how you define your schema to your database. But what's cool is then you take that, you build the form, you take the link, you send it out to your people, and now every time they fill out the form, the input goes into the database, and they sort of get a percentage of it. And the other thing I wanted to mention here is that like one of the innovations obviously is like the DAO being sort of controlled by a database, and then the other innovation is like every row in the database is an NFT. So what that means is that when someone contributes to the data, a piece of data, what they're at the low level is contributing a piece of a JSON object, and that JSON object is stored on IPFS. And then that sort of IPFS object is then wrapped in an NFT and inserted into the database. And so when someone fills out this form, what's happening is their data is being posted, and then they're getting in return for that form their data. Also, they get to own that data as well, and maybe they could use that information that they submitted to one particular DAO in another DAO, or they're the owners of it, so they could use it as a part of a machine learning training set, or as the ability to log into another website, or many other things.
That's very interesting. Um,
Yeah, there's sort
and
of two concepts I talked about there. Is one is like this NFT thing, and then the other is that everyone owns the data that they contribute to the database through the use of NFTs. And then the second one is building on what we talked about previously, of like people wanting to contribute useful data, and then we found that out, so we developed this thing that allows people to sort of poll or survey their audience using this Google Forms like interface to make that easier.
no, there's a lot of application and use cases here, and I was going to ask that as one of my questions, and I think you've done a very good job in kind of detailing out at least the iceberg, the tip of the iceberg of the utility. Because I imagine as you know, as things scale and new iterations come in, there's going to be a lot of use cases for DBDAO. But one thing that you brought up, and this is a question that may sound naive to some, and I don't have a computational technical background in that per se, and so forgive me, but all of the data that comes in, or I'll start with this one. How does DBDAO, the database, um, compare to, or how is it relevant or connected to IPFS and other storage solutions? Like, how does it sit within those different frameworks? So my assumption is that the data that is put into the database does eventually trickle its way onto IPFS as the ultimate storage layer. And so DBDAO may sit on top of that, but as the architect, can you kind of fill me in on that?
Yeah, so all the final resolution is done on IPFS, and then we basically use smart contracts and the blockchain to give data ownership and data provenance to all pieces of data, and then we cache it everything to make it performant, so that you can do a normal SQL or GraphQL query on us to query the data that is on chain. And then lastly, how does it fit in the sort of larger ecosystem is that there's a lot of things like IPFS and Arweave that exist, but these things are like file storage. So this is if you want to store a PDF, or if you want to store a movie or a song or anything like that. But a really important concept in web how web apps are built, or in conducting science, is this idea of a database. And what a database does is it gives you structured data. So if you have a column of names, or a column of first name, last name, address, and stuff like that, you want to be able to query who are all the people whose name begins with M, or who are you can query a structured database, so that you can return only the people or results that fit within the definitions of that query. And so you can't really do that on top of IPFS. And there's a very structured way. There's a very built out way of doing this using a SQL query or GraphQL. And so you can't really take that concept and do a query on top of IPFS. So we sort of built a layer that sits in between IPFS or Arweave and the thing that 99.99% of all web developers use, which is like a SQL data, queryable database, and made it so that it sits sort of in between those two things.
That's great. And I think that so not only is DBDAO solving the incentivization of the participants, but you're also delving into the adoption layer, right? Creating um, this stack that facilitates people's utilization of Web3 technology and IPFS and the like. That's great.
And one of the things that's different about us as we compare to, there are other databases out there, obviously like MongoDB and Postgres or stuff like this. But the problem with those is they're sort of run on this central server. So when you contribute a piece of data to it, you sort of lose that. You input it in the form, and then it's saved on AWS somewhere. But the problem with that is that you sort of lose custody of your data, and you can no longer buy and sell it. So what's nice is, like, as this database monetizes, I can then say I'm making like a couple dollars a month from an NFT that I have in a database. It would be nice if I wanted to go buy a car. I could collect all the data that I've created and sell that to someone else, because it has some reoccurring revenue, and I can sell it to other things. And the other thing that's really nice about building a database on top of the blockchain is that you have like data permanence. So a lot of science things from maybe many years ago have the data has disappeared, or people switched labs or anything like that, and our hard drive crashes, and that data is lost. But when you build this on the blockchain, you can recreate. It's pretty immutable, so it's dependent on IPFS, obviously, but you can sort of go back and redo or check any sort of previous data that has existed, which I think is important too.
No, always provenance is kind of the key, and that's what we need to solve the replication crisis. So not only are you solving all the other things, or at least contributing to the solution to all the other things, DBDAO is doing that as well. So you guys are a very holistic, comprehensive platform, it seems.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of things that make like databases fit very well together with DeSci and Web3.
For
There's a
sure.
lot of things that aren't being. There's a lot of things that I think would be better if with data ownership, with immutability, with incentivizations, with privacy and identity, and those things in a normal database, and those things are sort of all easily baked into a Web3 version.
Yeah, for sure. Um, And so in terms of like not adoption, but utility relative to things like MongoDB and other, AWS and other databases that are currently in use, would you say that DBDAO in its current state would be something that, somebody could switch off of? So DeSci world, all of our database infrastructure, would it be possible to switch over to DBDAO in its current iteration, or does there still some maturation that needs to happen before that?
Yeah, so you could there a lot of these things run using this thing called like a URI. So you put in your web application like DeSci World where you want to store the data, and you put in sort of a username and password and address for where the database lives. And so yeah, you could drop in a replacement. We would give you a new URI, and then you could then start using this as well. And the other thing we did is we re-architected a lot of the system so that it's gasless now. So the transaction costs were so minimal in terms of gas fees because of the way we mint the NFTs and the Avalanche and Arbitrum, the networks that we're on. The fees are pretty minimal. So we decided it would just be easier to cover those costs, and then you don't have to be popping up the wallet or work together with having people find the token that they need to pay gas. And so it makes it a really easy drop-in replacement for a lot of projects to adopt.
That's great. And I'm glad that you talked about the chain that you were on, because I'm sure people did have questions in terms of what layer, what blockchain, or what chain is DB launched on and can be utilized. So currently you guys are on Avalanche and Arbitrum. Is there prospects to go cross-chain, multi-chain into the system, or is that not necessary really?
Yeah, we'll probably go on Polygon at some point. There's not too much need to be on every chain. There's not, I mean, if the project is there, we can deploy it there. But right now, most things are sort of on Polygon, Arbitrum, or Avalanche, or open to, a lot of people are open to our choice in chain. So it doesn't necessarily matter Like
Yeah,
for a
yeah.
lot of the client DAOs, they're sort of just on whatever chain is default, and so it doesn't make too big of a difference at the end of the day.
No, that's very interesting, and that leads me to another question. But to stay a little bit on topic, so one thing that I wanted to know is the other side of the equation with the person who wants to come query the database. So let's say a pharma company who wants to come query a particular bio database or what have you. Um, because the data is on IPFS, in theory, they can go and find it if they put in enough man hours and person hours to be able to query that data, and you guys just kind of make it easier.
Yeah,
What
so,
is it that
I mean,
prevents it? Like, what's the incentive there? Aside from like you guys
yeah,
make it easy, but they could go around you. They could bypass you.
they could. So we can encrypt certain things. So using an encryption protocol, you can basically. I don't think that that's going to be too big of an issue because the amount of work that someone would have to do that would be a lot, and it's sort of like the same way you could buy a subscription to Spotify for a month and download all the songs, but that in or Netflix or YouTube even. You could download all of YouTube and rehost it and generate the ad revenue. It doesn't seem to be as big of an issue. But having said that, there are ways that you can fight it is through encrypting certain columns that you don't want to be public. So you might give away the first name and last name in the JSON object that is stored on IPFS and publicly available, but then you can encrypt uh, the email address so that in order to view that email address, you need to pay for the key to the NFT. You need to pay for the NFT that contains the key to be able to decrypt that specific column or that specific row.
Okay, very interesting. So then, just to be a little bit more on the red team, let me ask you this: a participant. So let's say I'm one of the scouts and I submit the data. Do the individual scouts are they able to see the totality of the data, or is it just the curator?
Yeah, this. I mean, once the if the data is publicly viewable, the scouts are able to do it. We are working with some things to do a time lock on some data sets. So you might not want to reveal all. You might want to have a closed period of this data will not be visible uh and for 2 weeks because otherwise you get groupthink or you might have people you just might want to close it off and then have it automatically pop open after this crypto time lock has occurred. And
Yeah. So that's
um,
interesting from the group thing. But the point that I was going to ask, not to cut you off too quickly, just to make sure that it was the right direction.
yeah,
But
yeah.
could the pharmaceutical company come in as a scout and be like, okay, I'm going to contribute, and then I'm also going to look at the rest of the data at the same time.
Yeah, so they could look at the plain text data. They wouldn't be able to look at the encrypted stuff though.
Okay, good. Just to make sure. Okay.
Yeah, I don't. This is for in that example, but in another example where you're putting ads next to it, like look at Instagram or Twitter, where they basically fund all the data collection through advertisements. If someone goes in and looks at it, they're generating ad revenue, and that then goes to the people that produced it. So it's not as big of an issue. It depends on the data. So if it's like a big hard piece of data to collect, like a genome or something that requires a lot. But if it's something smaller, like an Instagram post or just a picture, it's not as big of a deal, and that will generate ad revenue.
That's great. Um, so I don't want to take up too much time because I do want to give opportunity to the rest of the listeners to ask their questions. So I have two questions really. One, you mentioned that you guys are already, working with the Mushroom group um, for implementation of DBDAO. Have you guys formed any other, has DBDAO formed any other strategic partnerships with Web 2, Web 3 entities that you can speak on?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's a bunch we can speak on. We're working with Hair DAO. We're working with a psychedelics DAO to do Hair DAO for like hair loss, psychedelics DAO to collect trip reports. We're working with Weed to do collect data on people and to sort of write a paper together. We're working with some Web 2 companies or not Web 2, they're called like network state um, projects to handle their database of members as well. So there's like many different types of projects. We're primarily focused on the DeSci stuff, but then also are, you know, there's just been connections to like Web 2, or I would say they're like Web 2.5, where like network state is very much in line with the ethos of Web 3, but they just don't have like a core crypto native project. So, but we've been working together with that type of project as well. We're
That's
also
great.
bringing in some sort of Web 2 style projects that are interested in exploring out what it would look like to transition. Because a lot of scientists are, they don't need 1,000% Web3 Merkle root hashing of a database to uh, verify that all the data hasn't been tampered with. What they need is like a different type of system. And so we've been trying to transition some existing projects and get start talking around, you know, if they're interested in Web3.
No, for sure. And I mean, to your point, you mentioned this before, and I did want to bring it up. I don't see, so I think as time progresses, I think you will always have Web3 100% entities, and they'll operate. I think that's a little bit limiting of oneself, but people have the different philosophies. But I think the world is ultimately going to transition to a Web 2.5 or spectrum between Web 2 and Web 3, closer to Web 3. I think people are going to start seeing value in terms of the infrastructure that is being pulled up more from the client and the participant side, which will then force the larger corporations, the larger Web 2 like conglomerate entities to have to go that way because that's where their user base is going.
Yeah,
So it's great to see that you guys are kind of at the forefront of that and kind of leading that. I think that's what helps onboard people and make them understand that, DLT blockchain, it's not scams, it's not FTX and all of that. It's a use case, it's a tech stack that can be used for a variety of things, most of which can be very impactful in terms of changing the quality of life and the quality of all things that we are so used to using. So that's
fully.
fantastic.
Yeah,
The second
exactly.
thing, oh, go ahead. Yeah.
Oh no, go ahead. Yeah, it's exactly what I agree.
Second thing I was going to ask you is kind of a flip to the question that you asked me earlier before we started this is what excites you most relative to DB, like moving into the future, but also the general crypto space, or sorry, Web3, Web 2.5 space.
Yeah. I'd say like generally, I think we're starting to connect the parts in DeSci. So, I mean, like, look at DeFi. It took a couple of rounds to build out all the different things you needed to onboard money, to build the wallet out, to build out the underlying tooling like ethers and hard hat and that sort of thing. And I think right now, in DeSci, we're sort of at that space where we don't really have the primitives yet to collect data, to analyze data, to publish data to the funding is getting built out and like we're still building out and figuring out what are the primitives that we need in order to do it. And so but we're in touch with all these people and I see it happening. So I think it's just a matter of like connecting the dots to make it work. And then I think this year I hope we'll start to conduct like the first science projects that are like end to end done on DeSci, and we're trying to do it, and we're working together with other people to try and make that happen. And I think like doing like a real honest scientific experiment, maybe it's validating an existing data set or validating something that exists or a new discovery that's enabled by mass collaboration and mass collection. Um, I think all these things are very exciting. And then what else am I very excited about? Maybe I would say like the intersection of AI into this whole thing. So like we've all been watching what's happening with AI, and I think there could be like an interest. I don't know exactly what it is, but I've been sort of pondering it in my head. What does it look like when AI is more of an active participant in this process, in the crypto process?
That all sounds amazing. And okay, so first of all, for people in the audience who do have questions, please feel free to put in a request to come up. We're going to continue the conversation because there's so much great things to talk about, really. But feel free to hop on in and interject with your questions, and I'll add you in. But in the meantime of that, you talk about AI. Well, actually, first and foremost, shout out to Flow Science, Elijah here in the listeners, who is running In Real Labs, which is in essence an In Real Lab, and I think speaks a lot to your concept of Michael, your concept of like putting forth the real science through DeSci. So having these different DAOs from across the world, across the geographic locations, come together to ideate and maybe provide data, and then having these satellite facilities that can then be used for some of the hard science or the hard practicals that need to go into this. So shout out to Elijah Flow Science for his contribution to that, and I'm hoping to see many more of these kind of spring out in the space. But going back to your concept of AI, so you guys you talk about you use like a curator in your DBDAO infrastructure. Has there been like in thoughts about integrating AI into DB, DAO queries, querying of the data, validation of the data, and the like?
Yeah, so I've thought about how to build that out, and it's something we will do. Because I think it would be really awesome. Imagine this world, like you just say, like you tell GPT to say, like, hey, uh, accept all data. This is a bad example, but that looks real or that is related to plants, and reject everything else. And maybe we will have to work on that prompt, of course. But and then you give it a JSON object, and then it's like, oh, this is good, this is bad, and GPT is just like one of many multisigs. So on that curator process, so if GPT uh, maybe flags the content first, and then a human could go in after and like look at all the flagged content and meticulously look to see what is good and what is bad, or GPT could automatically reject things if it's maybe like the person doesn't, maybe it's like time sensitive and a person can't look at all sort of content immediately, and so GPT automatically deletes content that is thought to be bad. So there's many different like governance structures around what the interaction between an AI and the DAO and a human looks like, and we're open to exploring all of those different structures. But I do think that an AI would be a great curator for a lot of reasons. And then the other way an AI could be really useful is in checking to make sure that a human curator is doing a good job. So every NFT that is added to a database is actually logged on chain because it's you can look at all on chain events. And so you could use, we call that the log chain, and you could use AI to audit the curator. So a big problem in any sort of system is who watches the watcher, and like the Latin
Right.
phrase.
Yeah.
And I think like AI, because it's so there's so much data there, and also because it's so tedious, and I think AI could have a great chance at watching the watcher. And AI is, for some definition of bias, is it doesn't has different biases than a human bias would. So you don't really worry about someone. I mean, I'm sure someone will figure out a way to like hack this down the road and poison an AI, but you don't really worry about an AI accepting a bribe for accepting data into the data set in the same way a human does. So
Exactly.
I think that's like a great way of
Self-invested.
like watching the watcher.
Yeah, yeah. AI is though biased and imperfect. They're not self-invested yet until they attain
Yeah.
sentience. We have bigger problems at that point. But yeah, no, absolutely. That's great, and I'd love to see that kind of implementation. I imagine that AI is going to build itself. It's going to kind of weave itself into the basic framework of quote unquote Web3, Web2, whatever you want to. The future iteration of the internet is going to be. I think eventually, once we start to have AIs that pass the Turing test, as Elijah mentioned earlier in a tweet, um, and a few of the other things, we'll see them integrate much more into DAO infrastructure and validation infrastructure.
Yeah, exactly. I think so. That would be my. I think we'll see that, and maybe there'll be like an AI NFT of sorts where it runs on the AI. I don't know. There's many different. There's runs the AI runs on the data set that's encapsulated There's many different possibilities. Or maybe
Yeah, for
people sell their prompts for money in the same way people sell their. I've looked at some images and I've said like, oh, that would be cool to know what they used to generate that image. What was the prompt, and then you could sort of modify it to fit with it's like open source GitHub code. Like it fits 90% of it, but you want to like tweak it, and I'd probably pay to get access to their prompt that they used, and maybe that prompt is stored inside an NFT.
yeah. I think there's a lot of use cases and utilizations that can be put into place there. Again, I want to let the listeners know, those who come in late, a bit late, that you can, if you have questions, if you have commentaries, please feel free to come up. Though I do love speaking to Michael about these kind of things. So to your point, you said about pictures. So one thing we didn't get to really talk about is, I assume that DBDAO accepts all forms of data, but are there limitations or requirements? Like what kind of data can somebody upload into a DB database?
Yeah, I mean, so we can. It's actually really cool because it's stored on IPFS, and IPFS has such. I mean, there's a math. I don't remember. I think it's like petabytes that are on it, and so there's not really the same sort of constraints that you have. So because we just hash it and sort of put it on IPFS, you could upload a whole movie, a 3 GB movie, into the database. You could upload any sort of text, any sort of image, and it's all sort of just handled by IPFS. So the only question then becomes indexing it. So if you uploaded a movie, it becomes harder to index it. Now, AI in its future implementation, maybe using uh, image to text or video to text, might be able to index it, or you might be able to put it in a image to query, an image to go to text, which then queries the database, which pulls out other images. Um, or maybe there's a way of doing it directly image to image. And yeah, so there are no real limitations in terms of the only limitation is like the ability to index the data that's inside it. But yeah, you can upload images, you can upload pictures from your camera. Like we have this form that you basically fill out that's very similar to like a Google form style thing. And you can upload images, text areas, signatures, wallet addresses, drop down boxes, check boxes, radio buttons, all of those sorts of things.
That's really cool. That kind of opens up more questions of like, I imagine a future Netflix or a future iteration of Netflix based off of, the kind of DB infrastructure where, movie producers and people who make the movies will upload them onto their platform. Thus, everybody who participates in it, the royalties or the money that goes in gets immediately split to those people who've
Yeah,
contributed to the database, right? And then that can be further layered onto things like, you know, can trickle down that line from the movie owners to the producers and all that kind of stuff. There's like an iteration of this, and I think this is a really interesting concept to put forward. This like inherent incentivization or inherent rewarding database. I'm sure there are going to be a lot of iterations of this coming into the future because the applications are so broad.
yeah, exactly. Like any sort of data set that monetizes like through any mechanism, it could use the rails of being able to take that money and distribute it out to the people that actually like contributed the data and curated the data. And
Yeah,
there's a lot of instances of that on the web, obviously, like Netflix, Spotify, Instagram, TikTok, uh, Twitter, all these sort of things would benefit from that, would benefit content creators for that. Or DeSci, I mean, of course, DeSci. Like
no,
if
sure.
you contribute your data to the data set that is useful, you should be entitled to a portion of it.
Yeah, you can even think about things like, like regular income. So like governments, if you contribute to the government around you, and they have a way to track that's another example of it. It can scale up to like a variety of use cases. And I'm not going to keep rambling on this because we can talk about this kind of forever. The last thing that I kind of wanted to talk, and I am going to talk about this forever. I'll call you up afterwards. But the other thing that I want to talk about, the last thing that I personally want to touch on is a little bit more on the fun side. So, you, DB put together DeSci New York, which I think was your guys' first um, in real life event. Can you talk a little bit about that? Like how that went? What was the idea behind that? What was spoken about?
Yeah, I mean, so the idea was that like we were meeting all these interesting people just through our daily lives and through running this company that were interested in DeSci, and people were interested in getting involved, and there wasn't like a great way for everyone to meet each other and to learn about DeSci. So we started DeSci NYC, which is just basically a everyone comes together. We order pizza for everyone, drinks, chocolate fountain, and we host it at Empire DAO, and which is a like a co-working space in New York for Web3 projects. And it's just a really nice way for people to meet each other. And then we run two talks. So we're doing it monthly, actually. And we did the first one, but we're doing another one. And if people want more interest or interested in finding out more, we have a link at DeSci or DBDAO.com, and then /DeSci NYC. I think if you go to DBDAO.com, there's also a link in the toolbar for DeSci NYC. But it's just like, and there's an Illuma, so you can RSVP. It was just like a cool way because there were so many, a lot of people. It's like sort of like hosting like a Bitcoin meetup in like 2016. There just aren't that many people, but we had like 50 people there actually. So it is sort of growing, but there's just people that want to get involved and meet other people and learn about interesting new projects. So like last time we had a guy from Mushroom Observer, who is has it's sort of a Web 2 project. But what I really liked about it is they classify the names of mushrooms, and it's a collaborative experience. And they've been going on for a while, and they just talked a very sciencey talk on mushrooms and citizen science and collaboration. And so each month, we're going to have like sort of a scientist come and a technologist come, and each of them give sort of a side by side talk, and then leave plenty of time for people to meet each other as well.
That's great. That's what I'm excited about. To have more of these IRL events where people can kind of network and think. I think it's particularly important for such a nascent space, but also for the fact that we are so distributed across the world. More avenues, more opportunities to, excuse me, come together and meet in person is always going to be valuable to foster these kind of relationships. So that's great.
Yeah,
I hope to come down at one point.
we would love to have you. Yeah, we could do some very interesting stuff, which we can talk about.
That's a fact. I'm definitely gonna work on it. So we have reached beyond the top of the hour. This has been a great conversation. Michael, thank you for coming. As always, thank you, listeners, for coming in and even though you didn't ask questions this time, for participating and being here and learning about new projects. So make sure your DMs are open because we at DeSci will be reaching out to give you POAPs for participating. Michael, are there any final words that you want to give to the audience? Something we didn't cover, something you want to highlight?
No, I'm just very excited. If anyone wants to work together as a DeSci project that they want feedback or need help collecting data on, the DMs on this account and my personal account are open. Check out dbdao.xyz to learn more about us. But yeah, definitely would love to collaborate and work together with existing projects, or just ideate on if people need help with what they're thinking about, and sort of help them there. Or if
For
people
sure.
have feedback on our product, we're very open to. We'd love to hear like what's working, what's not working. So don't hesitate to reach out and with feedback.
Yes, bi-directional information and investment flow. That's what we want for Web3. That's what it is. It's what the whole goal is. So do check out DBDAO through all the socials and the links that Michael just highlighted. You can also learn about them by coming to the DeSci World dashboard. We also have their socials there. And clearly we're forming partnerships, so that's great. For the rest of you, the closing remarks is always, again, have your DMs open for POAPs. If you like this content, if you want to hear more about projects, other projects in the space, as well as re-listen to this wonderful conversation with DBDAO, you can do so by going to the DeSci World YouTube channel. We have most of our DeSci Rising episodes up on there. If you would like to support DeSci World in our initiatives, please feel free to go and get one of our microbes NFTs. It is going to be the MVP status in our ecosystem as it flourishes. It is going to be integrated with everything that we're pushing forward, and we're pushing for a lot of stuff. Um, so you guys can get yourselves that. And finally, and importantly, coming up soon on December 17th, we're having our DeSci Peaks 2022 roundup. We're going to be sitting down kind of like this, but it'll be a live stream where everybody can participate. And we're just going to be reminiscing about what's happened in DeSci over the last year, 2022. It's going to be informal. It's going to be somewhat chaotic. We have really interesting topics, as you can, you know, we'll be dropping posts and threads about this across Twitter. So stay tuned for that and come and participate. Everybody can come up and talk, live stream chat, get your opinions across. We'd love to kind of hear about what your experience has been in DeSci. This is both for founders and team groups, but also individuals, community members, and the like. So all are welcome, and I hope to see all of you there. Michael, I know you'll be there because I'm going to harass you to make sure. And with that, guys, have a great weekend. Um, I will
Thank
see you.
thank you for having us. Thank you for having me. Thank you all listeners for coming out. And fans in New York on January 5th, come to our DeSci NYC event. And yeah, thank you, Jelani, a bunch for hosting this. This has been really fantastic. And I learned a lot.
Oh, this has been a lot of fun. I learned a lot. I love this part of it. I love my job just for this. So again, also yes, do check out DeSci New York if you guys are in the general vicinity or not. This is a great team, a great group. Their Telegram is growing. If you need a link to that, reach out to Michael or myself. I'll get you that. And without that, again, have a great weekend. We'll see you next week for episode 17 of DeSci Rising. And yeah, have a great weekend, guys. Bye.
Bye.